I've always believed the three greatest mixed martial artists I've ever seen in my life were George St. Pierre, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and Jon Jones. The three of them have some interesting similarities and differences. All three beat every single person they ever faced. I know Jon Jones officially has a loss by DQ, but no one believes that was a loss. George does have 2 losses, but he defeated both athletes decisively in rematches. Khabib did it by having no losses. Interestingly, all 3 athletes have at least one match which is controversial in terms of who won and who lost. Jon Jones has had several matches which could have gone either way on the judges' scorecard. Khabib's match against Gleison Tibau could have gone either way. George's match with Hendricks could have gone either way. They all had matches that they won, which people would dispute the outcome. So that was a similarity between the 3 of them. All 3 of them have had the ability to dominate the direction of fights. When they want it to go down, it goes down. When they don't want it to go down, it doesn't. That's why I put such a heavy emphasis on that idea that a mixed martial arts champion must be able to determine the direction of a fight. It's the single most important attribute that they all must have. As to which of the 3 is the best, it's going to come down to criteria. You can't pull them apart. Which answer you give as to which of those 3 is the greatest of all time will come down to the criteria that you use. Okay, is it being undefeated? Is it the amount of time, or is it the quality of the opponents that they had? If you do it by quality of opponents, I think you probably have to give it to George. If you do it by measured dominance through not being defeated, then it has to go to Khabib. Arguably, you could say the same with Jon Jones, since his one loss is by DQ, but then you could also say the last 3 or 4 fights that Jon's had haven't been the same measure of dominance as we saw previously. So ultimately, you've got those 3 guys, in my opinion, and which one you choose will come down to who. It says more about who you are as a viewer than it does about the respective level of the athletes. You could throw a blanket over them. The 3 of them are just that good. And which one you select will probably say more about who you are as a viewer than it does about them as athletes.
I believe the best fighter, the GOAT, is not even born. Because the generation that is present benefit of a huge advantage. They have knowledge, technology that we didn't have before. And we had the knowledge that the other generation did not have before. But I believe the GOAT is not even born yet. As good as they are today, I think in sport where you can measure the performance, track and field, Olympic lifting, someone is better than the other one because you can measure the performance. Fighting, it's all subjective. We always debate of who would win, but the tendency in sport is that performance get better. I don't think it's because the athlete necessarily get better. It's because they have access to better technology, knowledge, and they learn from their predecessor.
As long as that knowledge is transferred forward. So, something tells me that the greatest of all time lived a few thousand years ago, and it's forgotten. Some of the greatest warriors. Like, you imagine the kind of grapplers, the history didn't record them. There could have been small tribes where they developed mini UFCs, and they've developed the kind of things you have to think of, like the Gracies. Just a small family was able to develop so much so quickly.
I often ask this discussion with John, and I think it's very important, like to mention. I ask you several times, like, what would happen if we would take a fighter of modern days facing the champion of pancreation?
This is an interesting question,
and you brought some incredible good point, and people don't realize it.
Yeah, no, I think one of the great tragedies of martial arts history is our loss of the historical records of pancration. Like, most of what we know was, from what I'm told, is actually lost in the fires of the Library of Alexandria, and we're left with only a pitiful amount of information on pancration matches. But what we do know is that there was a very large participation in the sport, and that it was widely considered the most popular sport in the ancient Olympics, and that it was represented in the ancient Olympics for many hundreds of years, plus a long period of time before its introduction into the ancient Olympics. And so the development time that it may have had would have been very significant. As far as we know, most of the development would have been in the major Greek city-states for literally hundreds of years of development. Given its prestige as an Olympic sport, then the best athletes would have been doing it. Some of the sharpest minds that we know of in human history were involved in the sport. Plato, the great philosopher, was a pancreationist in his youth. In fact, his name, Plato, is a nickname. Platus is like plate. It means broad or big guy, like the big guy. And he spoke often about pancreation in his written works. Imagine people with the intelligence of Plato thinking about grappling technique for hundreds of years in the most popular Olympic sport of that time. Significant numbers of people with financial backing, as city-states put great prestige upon Olympic success. They would have funneled athletes in, brought in the best coaches, and they had that for many hundreds of years. Like, it's quite conceivable that the best pancreation athletes were of the absolute first quality. And it's so sad to think we'll never know what was their skill level. And
it's interesting to think about what kind of techniques they developed, whether there's stuff we haven't discovered yet.